Hi friends, it's Danielle with Take Care Mama, and today I'm going to talk about my top 10 Stephen King books. I've been so excited to do this video. I feel like I finally read enough to do this, and then as I read more, I'm excited to make more and see what changes. I am new to Stephen King. I started reading him just about a year ago, and I think I've read 17 books so far. So these are the top 10 out of those 17. And the big three that I haven't read yet that often show up on people's lists are It, Salem's Lot, and The Stand. I'm so excited to read all three of these pretty soon. But these are my top 10 right now. Next week it might change. It's just what I thought today as I was putting this together, and it was really hard to do. I've only had like one or two Stephen King books that I really didn't like, and most of them I have loved. Starting at number 10, I don't see this on a lot of people's lists, but that is Revival. I read this recently and really liked it. It is horror and religious horror, which is probably my favorite subgenre of horror. This is kind of Stephen King's take on Frankenstein, and I thought it was really good. It was really scary. The ending is a little controversial, and I loved it. Next, also controversial that it's so low on my list, but that is Pet Sematary. I feel like a lot of people have this as their all-time favorite Stephen King book. I'm interested to see how I feel about this book maybe in another year. I didn't like it as much as I thought I would, and I can't figure out why yet, but it was really good. It was really scary, and I'm really excited to watch the adaptations. I've never seen either of the Pet Semataries, and I have them on my DVR, and I'm excited to check those out. Number 8 is The Shining, which is horror, as well as Pet Sematary. I was so scared reading this. A lot of people know what The Shining is. It's famous. It's a famous movie, a famous ghost story. And out of all of the Stephen King books I read so far, I have been the most terrified reading this book. I had to take breaks because I was so scared. Also controversial, I hate this cover. And there's a whole series of covers that look like this, and I hate them. So I'm hoping to find a used copy of a different version at some point and replace this. Next, we have the big one, 11/22/63. This is sci-fi and historical fiction. Before reading Stephen King, I thought he was strictly horror, but he has a wide variety of genres that he writes with, and this happens to be more of a science fiction. This is a time travel story of a man who goes back to the late 50s, early 60s to prevent the assassination of JFK. So we have our science fiction time travel stuff, and because we're covering a real world event, there is some historical fiction in there as well. This is a thick book. You'll see, I happen to love Stephen King's larger books, and this was so thrilling and exciting, and I think a really accessible book to people. If you want to check out Stephen King, but you're a little afraid of the horror genre, I think this might be a good place to start. Next, we have Lisey's Story. This has become a little more popular recently because of Apple TV's adaptation. This is magical realism, a little bit of horror, and a love story. And I have to say, the first half was really difficult to get into. His writing style, to me, is very different in this. And the payoff paid off. It was a beautiful book, a scary book, a mind-bending book, and I loved it a lot. I would really love to reread this at some point. And it's my favorite cover of Stephen King books that I have. This jacket comes off, and it's beautiful. I got this at a used bookstore, and it's a first edition, and my toddler kind of ruined it, but that's okay because I'm keeping it forever. Next, we have Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. This is a standalone novella, but also the first story in the collection Different Seasons. And this is also a famous movie. It's also not horror. I would say this is more just like literary fiction. And I gotta say, I loved this book. This is another great starter king. It's a lot less intimidating than 11/22/63 because it's so short. 111 pages for this copy. And this is just a good story about hope and perseverance. And his writing is just beautiful in here. I love this. Next is The Green Mile. I think this was my second Stephen King book. I had never seen the movie before. I didn't know much going into it. And what an amazing story. Another genre crossover. There are scary parts. I wouldn't call it incredibly scary, but it's just kind of like Shawshank Redemption, an amazing story. For some reason, I pair those two closely together in my head when I think about Stephen King's work. And it's just a wonderful, heartbreaking story. Again, magical realism, a little scary things, and a beautiful story. And this is another one I really recommend to people who are curious about Stephen King, especially if you're okay with the horror. This might be a good place to start because it is scary. There are some gruesome scenes, but it's pretty, but it is at a minimum. So I think this is a great place to start. Really cool. He put this out as a serial novel. I think there were 6 different sections, and they were published in little standalone sections that came out, and people read them all. And I don't own The Green Mile. I'm definitely looking out for it. I'd love to own the novel in full, and I'd love to find the little leaflet sections. I think that is so ingenious. Next, we have another big one, and that is Under the Dome. This, again, is pretty controversial. A lot of Stephen King fans kind of hate this book. My version is 1,074 pages, so a really big one. This is the very first Stephen King book I read, and that might have swayed my ranking of this a little bit, but I just loved it. It is such an epic story and really well told. This is about a small town, and an invisible glass dome just appears over their town one day, and everyone inside the town is stuck. Everyone outside can't get in. And we look at the town politics and how people freak out and which neighbors rise up to lead. There's just a lot of crazy stuff, as you can imagine, that happens in here. This ending is very controversial. A lot of people hate it. And I have to tell you, out of all of Stephen King's endings, this is my all-time favorite ending. I love it. I want to read this again. Oh, man. Number 2. I can't believe it's number 2 and not number 1. My number 1 book was a sneaker. But number 2 is Misery. And oh my goodness, I have never been more on the edge of my seat for a book. I would categorize this book as suspense. Oh my gosh. Another really famous book. It's about a famous author who is kidnapped by his number 1 fan, and she makes him rewrite a novel. Annie Wilkes is the villain, and she is probably the scariest villain I've ever come across. It was an intense ride the whole way through. It was so good. I loved Misery so much, and I think about it all the time. I cannot recommend it enough. If you want a gruesome, suspenseful book, go for it. I don't think you'll be disappointed. The number 1 book, such a shock to me, is The Drawing of Three, which is a fantasy book, which I thought I hated fantasy. This is part of his epic Dark Tower series. It's the 2nd book. I read the first book, The Gunslinger, 6 months ago, and I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it, and I never thought I would continue this series because it's fantasy and I didn't love it, so why would I continue? I picked this up on a whim. I thought it was going to be like, to me, sometimes these books look so short, but it's not that short. It's 460 pages. I thought it was going to be a quick, easy read. I had it from the Goodwill. I loved this so much. It was such an unexpected, wild ride and suspenseful. This is such an interesting crossover genre book. We have like a Western, we have fantasy, it's scary, there's mafia things in here. I just was shocked by how much I love this book. And I can't wait to read this series. I'm going to read an epic fantasy series in 2022. The Girl Who Hates Fantasy. I don't know what's happening in my world right now, but I loved it. As of December 2021, those are my top Stephen King books. I'm going to read so many Stephen Kings in 2022, and I can't wait to make an updated top 10. I'm excited to see what things get kicked off this list, what things among this list change, and what books get brought in. And I'd love to know, what do you agree with me on and what do you disagree? What are your top 10 Stephen King books? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. I'm going to be doing a lot more Stephen King content in 2022. Give this video a thumbs up. I hope you're having a wonderful day and take care. Bye.